His crown, her chains, their fate. Bianca Vitali had never believed in second chances. But when her father's empire collapsed, she had no choice but to seek out the one man she had sworn to hate. Matteo Greco leaned back in his chair, a slow smirk curling his lips. "You need me," he murmured. "And I never do anything for free." Chapter 1. The Reluctant Return. The train rattled along the tracks, each clack a rhythmic hammer blow against the fragile piece Bianca Vitali had tried, and failed, to cultivate over the past decade. 10 years. 10 years since she'd walked away from this life, from him, from the suffocating opulence and ever-present danger that came with being a Vitali. She looked out the window, the Italian countryside blurring into a tapestry of greens and golds under the late afternoon sun. It was beautiful, undeniably so, but it held no comfort for her. Beauty, she'd learned, was often a gilded cage. Bianca smoothed down the simple, dark blue dress she wore, a stark contrast to the designer clothes that had once filled her wardrobe. The fabric felt foreign against her skin, a deliberate choice. She wanted to be unrecognizable, a ghost returning to a city that had long since declared her dead. Not literally, of course, but in every way that mattered to the famiglia. She was no longer Bianca Vitali, the heiress. She was simply Bianca, a woman who had carved out a quiet, ordinary life for herself in a small village nestled in the hills of Tuscany. A life that was now irrevocably over. The summons had come in the form of a terse, handwritten note delivered by a man she didn't recognize, a man with eyes as cold and hard as the cobblestones of Florence.
"Your father is dying.
He requests your presence." No pleas, no apologies, just a stark demand disguised as a request. Her father, Don Antonio Vitali, a man who had ruled his empire with an iron fist and a heart seemingly carved from the same stone, was dying.
And he wanted to see her.
Bianca closed her eyes, the image of her father's face, etched with the lines of power and ruthlessness, flashing behind her eyelids. She hadn't spoken to him since the day she'd left, the day she'd chosen freedom over family, love over loyalty. A choice that had cost her everything, and yet had given her the only peace she'd ever known.
Until now.
The train began to slow, the screech of brakes announcing their arrival in Florence. Bianca's heart, which had been a dull ache for most of the journey, now hammered against her ribs with a frantic rhythm. She felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach, a familiar feeling she'd thought she'd buried long ago.
Fear.
Not of her father, not anymore, but of the past, of the memories that threatened to engulf her, of the man she knew she would have to face.
Matteo Greco.
The name alone sent a shiver down her spine, a complex mixture of fear and something else, something she refused to acknowledge. He had been her father's right-hand man, his most trusted enforcer, a shadow that had always been present, watching, waiting. And he had been more. Their connection had been a forbidden flame, burning bright and dangerous in the darkness, a secret they had guarded fiercely, until it had all fallen apart. She stepped off the train and onto the platform, the sounds of the city washing over her, the rumble of Vespas, the chatter of voices, the distant clang of church bells. Florence. It was just as she remembered it, a city of beauty and brutality, of art and ancient vendettas. A city where secrets were currency and betrayal was a way of life. A sleek, black car was waiting for her. The driver a young man with the Vitali crest subtly embroidered on his jacket. He nodded curtly, his eyes assessing her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. He didn't speak, simply opened the car door for her. Bianca slid into the back seat, the leather cool and smooth beneath her fingertips. The scent of old money and something darker, something akin to danger, filled the air. As the car pulled away from the station and navigated the narrow, winding streets, Bianca felt a sense of unreality settle over her. It was as if she were stepping back into a dream, a nightmare she had fought so hard to escape. The familiar landmarks, the Duomo with its magnificent dome, the Ponte Vecchio with its glittering shops, the imposing Palazzo Vitali, her childhood home loomed before her, each one a silent witness to her past. The Palazzo Vitali was a fortress, a testament to the family's power and wealth. Its ancient stone walls had seen centuries of secrets, of triumphs and tragedies. As the car pulled up to the heavy, wrought iron gates, Bianca felt a wave of claustrophobia wash over her. She was trapped again. The gates swung open, revealing the vast courtyard and the imposing facade of the palazzo. The driver parked the car and hurried to open her door. Bianca stepped out, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing pulse. Standing at the top of the grand staircase, silhouetted against the warm glow of the setting sun, was a figure she recognized instantly. Even after 10 years, his presence was unmistakable. Tall, dark, and undeniably dangerous.
Matteo Greco.
He hadn't changed much, she noted, a flicker of something she couldn't quite name passing through her. His hair was still as dark as a raven's wing, his eyes still held that same intense, predatory gaze. He was older, of course, the lines around his eyes deeper, his jawline more defined, but the raw power he exuded was as potent as ever. He watched her approach, his expression unreadable. Bianca walked towards him, her head held high, refusing to show any sign of weakness. The distance between them closed, each step a painful reminder of everything she had lost, everything she had run from. When she reached the foot of the stairs, she stopped. The silence between them stretched, taut and heavy with unspoken words, with the ghosts of a past that refused to stay buried. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low, resonant rumble that sent a shiver down her spine. "Bianca," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth, any hint of the affection that had once existed between them. "You came." It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. A subtle reminder of the power he still held, the control he exerted over this world, the world she had so desperately tried to escape. She met his gaze. Her own eyes narrowed. "He's dying," she replied, her voice equally devoid of emotion. "I had no choice." A flicker of something surprise, perhaps, or even disappointment crossed his face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He simply nodded, his gaze sweeping over her, taking in her simple dress, her lack of jewelry, the absence of the pampered heiress he had once known. "He's waiting for you," he said, gesturing towards the massive wooden doors of the palazzo. "He doesn't have much time." Bianca took a deep breath and started up the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest. As she passed Matteo, she could feel the heat of his body, smell the familiar scent of his cologne, a blend of citrus and something darker, something that spoke of danger and power. It was a scent that had once intoxicated her, a scent that now filled her with a sense of dread. She didn't look at him, didn't dare to meet his gaze. She simply kept walking, towards the doors that led to her father, to the past, to the life she had thought she'd left behind forever. The heavy doors creaked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway. The air was thick with the scent of incense and old wood, a familiar smell that brought back a flood of memories, both good and bad. Bianca hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the cold metal of the door handle. She knew that once she stepped inside, there would be no turning back. Her life, the quiet, peaceful existence she had built for herself, would be shattered. She would be, once again, Bianca Vitali, daughter of the dawn. And that meant facing not only her dying father, but also the man who had once held her heart, the man who was now, more than ever, her enemy. The man who held the key to her future, a future that suddenly seemed terrifyingly uncertain. Chapter 2. Echoes of a Shattered Empire. The hallway stretched before her, lined with portraits of Vitali ancestors, their stern faces staring down at her, judging her. Bianca felt their disapproval, their silent condemnation of her choices. She had betrayed them, abandoned their legacy. She had chosen love over duty, a cardinal sin in their world. As she walked, she noticed the subtle signs of decline. The once pristine marble floors were now dull, the gilded frames of the paintings tarnished. The air of opulence was still there, but it was fading, like a once vibrant tapestry slowly unraveling. Her father's empire, the empire she had rejected, was crumbling. A maid, her face etched with worry, appeared from a side corridor. She bowed her head slightly. "Signorina Bianca," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Your father is in his study. He is weak." Bianca nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She followed the maid down the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The study door was ajar, and she could hear the faint sound of labored breathing. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, the heavy curtains drawn, casting long shadows across the walls. The air was thick with the scent of sickness and old books. Her father, Don Antonio Vitali, lay in a large, four-poster bed, his once powerful frame now frail and wasted. He was hooked up to various machines, their rhythmic beeping a stark reminder of his mortality. He looked so different from the imposing figure she remembered. His skin was pale and translucent, his eyes sunken, his once thick black hair now thin and white. But his gaze, when he turned his head towards her, was still sharp, still held that same intensity that had always both intimidated and fascinated her. "Bianca," he rasped, his voice weak, but still carrying a hint of his former authority. "You came." It was the same words Matteo had used, but the meaning was different. There was a hint of relief in her father's voice, a flicker of something that might have been affection. She wasn't sure. She walked towards the bed, her legs feeling heavy, her heart aching. She knelt beside him, taking his frail hand in hers. His skin was cold and dry, his grip surprisingly weak. "Father," she said, her voice choked with emotion. He looked at her, his eyes searching her face, as if trying to find something he had lost. "You look different," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I am different," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm not the girl you remember." He closed his eyes for a moment, a flicker of pain crossing his face.
"No," he said.
"You're not. You're stronger." She was surprised by his words. She had expected anger, recrimination, not praise. "Why did you summon me?" she asked, her voice direct. She didn't want to play games, didn't want to waste what little time he had left. He opened his eyes again, his gaze locking onto hers. "The Famiglia," he said, his voice strained. "It's falling apart. There are enemies everywhere." She knew this, of course. The note had hinted at it. The state of the palazzo confirmed it. But to hear him admit it, to hear the fear in his voice, was shocking. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He struggled to speak, his breath coming in ragged gasps.
"Protect it," he said. "Protect what's left."
"You're the only one I can trust." She stared at him, her mind reeling. He was asking her to take over, to step back into the life she had so desperately tried to escape. It was an impossible request. "I can't," she said, shaking her head. "I don't know anything about this world anymore. I've been gone too long." "You are a Vitali," he said, his voice surprisingly firm. "It's in your blood. You have the strength, the cunning to do what needs to be done." He coughed, a deep, rattling sound that shook his frail body. Bianca felt a pang of sympathy for him, despite everything. He was a dying man, clinging to the last vestiges of his power, desperate to save his legacy. "There's something else," he said, his voice weaker now. "Matteo," he paused, struggling to catch his breath. Bianca's heart skipped a beat. The mention of Matteo's name sent a jolt of electricity through her. He will help you," her father continued. "He's loyal."
"To me."
"To the Famiglia." Bianca doubted that. Matteo's loyalty had always been a complex thing, a web of obligations and hidden agendas. She couldn't trust him, not completely. Not after what had happened between them. But, her father continued, his voice barely audible, "Be careful. There are secrets, things you don't know." He closed his eyes, his breathing becoming more labored. Bianca leaned closer, her hand tightening around his. "What secrets?" she asked, her voice urgent. "Father, tell me." But he didn't answer. His grip on her hand loosened, and his breathing stopped. The machines beside the bed began to emit a high-pitched, continuous tone. Bianca stared at him, her mind numb with shock. He was gone. She slowly stood up, her legs shaking. She felt a strange mix of grief and relief. Grief for the father she had never really known, for the life she had lost. Relief that his suffering was over, that the burden of his empire was no longer his.
But it was hers now.
He had placed it squarely on her shoulders, a burden she didn't want, a burden she wasn't sure she could bear. She turned and walked towards the door, her mind racing. She had to figure out what to do, how to navigate this treacherous world she had been thrust back into. And she had to do it alone. Or so she thought. As she reached the door, she heard a voice behind her. "He's gone," Matteo said, his voice low and somber. She turned and saw him standing in the shadows, his face unreadable. He had been there the whole time, silently watching, listening. "Yes," she said, her voice flat. He walked towards her, his eyes fixed on hers. "He made you promise, didn't he?" he asked. She didn't answer, simply met his gaze. "He made you the heir," he continued, his voice a low murmur. "He gave you the responsibility, the power." She still didn't speak. She couldn't. The weight of her father's words, the reality of her situation, was crushing her. Matteo stopped in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the familiar scent of his cologne. It was a scent that brought back a flood of memories she had tried to suppress for 10 years. "You don't want this," he said, his voice soft, almost gentle. "I know you don't." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his. Was it possible he understood? Could he see the fear, the doubt, that was consuming her? "I don't have a choice," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. It was a touch that sent a shiver down her spine, a touch that was both familiar and terrifying. "You always have a choice, Bianca," he said, his voice low and husky. "And I will be here to help you make it." His words, a promise and a threat all wrapped into one, hung heavy between them. And in the dark recesses of her heart, a sliver of something she'd thought long dead hope, perhaps, or something far more dangerous flickered to life. Chapter 3. The Serpent's Gaze. Matteo's touch lingered on her cheek, a ghost of warmth against the sudden chill that had settled over Bianca. His eyes, dark and intense, held hers captive. She saw a flicker of something there, something beyond the cold, calculating facade he usually presented to the world. Was it concern, pity, or something else entirely, something she couldn't quite decipher? He withdrew his hand, the absence of his touch leaving her skin feeling strangely cold. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words, with the weight of their shared past, with the uncertainty of their future. "Help me?" she finally asked, her voice a low murmur, laced with skepticism. "Or control me?" A faint smile, more of a tightening of his lips than a genuine expression of amusement, played on his face. "Perhaps a little of both," he admitted, his voice a low rumble that resonated deep within her. Bianca stepped back, breaking the spell, the magnetic pull he seemed to exert over her. She needed space, needed to think, needed to remember who he was, who they were. He was Matteo Greco, her father's enforcer, a man steeped in the darkness of the Famiglia, a man who had once held her heart in his hands and then crushed it. "I don't need your control, Matteo," she said, her voice regaining some of its strength. "I need information. I need to understand what's happening, who my father's enemies are, what secrets he was talking about." He inclined his head, a gesture of acknowledgement. "Of course. That's what I'm here for. To guide you, to protect you, to ensure the Vitali legacy survives." The words were smooth, reassuring, but Bianca couldn't shake the feeling that there was something hidden beneath the surface, something he wasn't telling her. She had always been able to read people, to sense their true intentions, but Matteo was an enigma, a puzzle she had never been able to solve. "Let's start with the enemies," she said, her voice firm. "My father said there were many. Who are they?" Matteo gestured towards a pair of leather armchairs in front of a cold fireplace.
"Seat, Bianca."
"This will take some time." She hesitated for a moment, then reluctantly sat down. The leather was cold against her skin, a reminder of the chill that had settled over her, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Matteo sat opposite her, his posture relaxed, but his eyes alert, watchful. The most immediate threat is the Rossi family, he began, his voice low and steady. They've been rivals of the Vitales for generations, a blood feud that goes back centuries. They see her father's death as an opportunity to seize control of his territory, his businesses, everything.
Bianca nodded.
She had heard stories of the Rossi family, tales of their brutality, their ruthlessness. They were a force to be reckoned with. And who else?
She asked.
There are others, Matteo said, his eyes darkening. Smaller families, ambitious individuals who see a chance to rise in the ranks. And then there are external threats. The police, the government. They've been trying to dismantle the Vitali Empire for years. He paused, his gaze sweeping over her, as if assessing her reaction. It's a dangerous game, Bianca, he said. A game with very high stakes. She knew that, of course. She had grown up in this world, had witnessed the violence, the betrayals, the constant struggle for power. But she had always been on the periphery, protected, shielded from the worst of it. Now she was at the center, exposed, vulnerable. My father mentioned secrets, she said, changing the subject. What was he talking about? Matteo's expression shifted, his eyes becoming guarded. Your father had many secrets, Bianca, he said. Some of them are best left buried.
But he wanted me to know, she insisted.
He told me to be careful, that there were things I didn't know. What things? He hesitated, his gaze shifting away from hers. There are rumors, he said, his voice evasive. Whispers of a betrayal a long time ago. Something that could shake the foundations of the famiglia. A betrayal? Bianca felt a knot of unease tighten in her stomach. By whom? Matteo's eyes met hers again, his expression unreadable. That's what you need to find out, he said. And you need to be careful. Because whoever it was, they may still be out there. His words sent a shiver down her spine. A betrayal within the famiglia, a secret that had been hidden for years, possibly decades. It was a dangerous game indeed, and she was now a player, whether she wanted to be or not. He rose from his chair. We should inform the others. The family needs to know about your father's passing. And your ascension. Ascension. The word echoed with chilling weight. It wasn't a choice. It was an execution of a plan already laid out, a stage on which she now had to perform. There is much to do, he said, looking down at her, that serpentine gaze locking onto her. And very little time. And despite her resolve, her will to remain detached, Bianca felt a flicker of fear, cold and sharp, pierce through her. She was no longer just grieving a complicated father. She was stepping into a war zone. And Matteo Greco, the man she both feared and craved, was her only guide. Whether that was a blessing or a curse remained to be seen. Chapter 4. A bargain struck in shadows. The news of Don Antonio Vitali's death spread through the palazzo like wildfire. Servants whispered in hushed tones, their faces etched with a mixture of grief and apprehension. Family members, both close and distant, began to arrive, their expressions carefully masked, their eyes betraying a mixture of mourning and ambition. The air was thick with tension, with the unspoken question of what would happen next, who would take control of the fractured empire. Bianca stood in the grand hall, surrounded by the familiar faces of her relatives, people she hadn't seen in years, people who had once been part of her everyday life. She felt like an outsider, a stranger in her own home. They looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, their eyes questioning her right to be there, her ability to lead. Matteo stood beside her, a silent, imposing presence, his very proximity a subtle warning to anyone who dared to challenge her. He was her protector, her advisor, her jailer? She still wasn't sure. The family gathered in the formal dining room, a vast, opulent space dominated by a long, mahogany table. The walls were adorned with portraits of Vitali ancestors, their stern faces seeming to judge the proceedings. Bianca sat at the head of the table, the position her father had always occupied, the position she now inherited. It felt heavy, uncomfortable, a symbol of the burden she had been forced to bear. Matteo stood behind her chair, his hand resting lightly on the back of it, a gesture that was both possessive and protective. He addressed the assembled family, his voice calm and authoritative. As you all know, he began, Don Antonio Vitali is gone. He passed peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by family. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the room, lingering on each face. He named his daughter, Bianca Vitali, as his successor. She will lead the famiglia from this day forward. There was a murmur of surprise, a ripple of unease that spread through the room. Some of the older members, the traditionalists, looked disapproving, their faces set in expressions of disapproval. Others, the younger ones, seemed more curious, more open to the idea of a woman in charge. Bianca has been away for many years, Matteo continued, his voice silencing the murmurs. But she is a Vitali. She has the blood of her father running through her veins. And she has my full support. His words were a clear message, a warning to anyone who might consider challenging Bianca's authority. Matteo's loyalty, at least for now, was to her. And that meant something. Bianca stood up, her hands gripping the edge of the table. She looked at the faces around her, at the mixture of doubt and expectation in their eyes. She had to show them that she was strong, that she was capable, that she was worthy of their respect. My father entrusted me with the responsibility of leading this family, she said, her voice clear and steady. I know I have been away, but I am here now. And I will do everything in my power to protect the Vitali legacy, to honor his memory. She paused, her gaze locking onto each face in turn. I know there are challenges ahead, she continued. There are enemies who would seek to take advantage of our grief, to exploit our weaknesses. But we will not let them. We will stand together, united, and we will overcome any obstacle. Her words were met with a mixture of applause and silence. Some were clearly impressed by her strength, by her determination. Others remained skeptical, unconvinced. After the formal announcement, Matteo drew Bianca aside. The weight of the meeting, the stares, the silent judgments, it all pressed down on her. They doubt you, he said, his voice low, his eyes searching hers. I expected that, Bianca replied, trying to sound braver than she felt. I'm an outsider, a woman, and they remember how I left. They also remember who your father was, Matteo countered. And they know what it means to defy a Vitali. He paused. But defiance can come from within as well. Bianca looked at him sharply. Are you referring to the betrayal my father mentioned? Matteo nodded slowly. It's a shadow over this family, Bianca. One we need to uncover. But tonight, he gestured towards a smaller, more intimate room off the main hall. Tonight, we need to solidify your position. We need to make a bargain. Bianca followed him into the smaller room, a private study filled with dark wood and the scent of old leather. A single lamp cast a warm glow, illuminating a small table and 2 chairs. What kind of bargain? Bianca asked, suspicion lacing her voice. Matteo sat down, his gaze unwavering. A bargain for your protection and for my loyalty. Your father trusted me. You, however, do not. It was a blunt statement of fact, one she couldn't deny. You were his enforcer, Matteo, she said. You did his bidding, no matter how unsavory. I did what was necessary to protect the famiglia, he replied, his voice even. And now, I will do what is necessary to protect you. And what does that entail? He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. It entails complete trust, Bianca. You need to trust me, to follow my guidance, to let me handle the difficulties that will inevitably arise. And in return? She asked, her voice tight. In return, he said, his voice a low murmur, I will ensure your safety, your power, your succession. I will deal with the enemies, both internal and external. I will be your shield, your sword, your everything. The word everything hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. It was a dangerous offer, a seductive promise. He was offering her protection, power, but at what cost? Her freedom? Her independence? Her heart? I don't make deals with the devil, Matteo, she said, her voice trembling slightly. He smiled, a slow, predatory smile that sent a shiver down her spine. "But you are already in hell, Bianca," he said. "And I am the only one who can guide you out." She stared at him, her mind racing. She was trapped, cornered. She had no choice but to accept his offer, to trust him, at least for now. But she would not surrender completely. She would not let him control her. "I agree to your bargain," she said, her voice firm. "But I have conditions." His smile widened. "Of course.
"I will not be a puppet, Mateo," she said.
"I will make my own decisions. I will be informed of everything, every detail, every risk."
"Agreed," he said.
"And," she added, her gaze unwavering, "if I find out you are deceiving me, betraying me, the bargain is off." He nodded, his eyes dark and intense. "Understood." He extended his hand across the small table. Bianca hesitated for a moment, then took it. His grip was strong, firm, a silent promise of protection, a subtle thread of control. The bargain was struck. A pact made in shadows, a dangerous dance between two souls, bound by a shared past and an uncertain future. It was a devil's bargain indeed. And as she looked into his intense gaze, she felt a thrill, fear mixed with a terrifying excitement. Knowing she was playing a game she might not survive. But she had to play. For her father. For her family. For herself. Chapter 5. The Weight of Unspoken Words. The days following her father's funeral were a blur of activity. Bianca found herself thrust into a whirlwind of meetings, briefings, and introductions. Mateo was constantly by her side, guiding her, advising her, introducing her to the key players in the Vitali Empire: lawyers, accountants, capos, soldiers. He explained the intricacies of their businesses, both legitimate and illicit, the complex web of alliances and rivalries that defined their world. Bianca listened, observed, absorbed. She learned quickly, her sharp mind grasping the nuances of the Famiglia's operations. She discovered a hidden talent for strategy, for negotiation, for reading people's true intentions. She surprised herself with her own strength, her own resilience. But the nights were harder. The silence of her childhood bedroom, once a sanctuary, now felt oppressive, filled with ghosts and shadows. She struggled to sleep, haunted by memories of her father, of her past with Mateo, of the uncertain future that lay ahead. One evening, after a particularly grueling meeting with the heads of several Vitali-controlled businesses, Bianca found herself alone in her father's study. The room was still filled with his presence, his scent, his energy. She sat in his large leather chair, feeling dwarfed by its size, by the weight of the responsibility she had inherited. She noticed a small, antique box on his desk, a box she didn't remember seeing before. It was made of dark wood, intricately carved with scenes of hunting and warfare. Curiosity overcoming her, she opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a collection of old letters, tied together with a faded ribbon. She carefully untied the ribbon and picked up the top letter. The handwriting was familiar, elegant, and precise, her mother's. Bianca's heart skipped a beat. Her mother had died when she was very young, a victim of a tragic car accident, or so she had always been told. She had few memories of her, only fleeting images of a beautiful, gentle woman with a warm smile and a loving touch. She began to read the letter, her hands trembling. It was dated several months before her mother's death. It was addressed to her father. "Antonio," the letter began, "I can no longer live with this lie. I can no longer pretend that everything is all right. Our marriage is a sham, our life a carefully constructed facade. I know about your other life, your other family. I know about the danger you put us in every day." Bianca's breath caught in her throat. Her mother knew? Knew about the Famiglia, about the violence, about the secrets? "I'm leaving," the letter continued. "I'm taking Bianca with me. I cannot allow her to grow up in this world, surrounded by darkness and death. I want her to have a normal life, a safe life, a life filled with love and happiness." Bianca's eyes filled with tears. Her mother had tried to protect her, had tried to take her away from this life. But she had failed. "I know you will try to stop me," the letter went on. But I beg you, Antonio, let us go. Let us have a chance at a better life. For Bianca's sake. The letter ended there and signed. Bianca carefully folded it and placed it back in the box. She picked up another letter, and another, each one a testament to her mother's growing desperation, her fear, her love for her daughter. As she read, a chilling realization dawned on her. Her mother's death had not been an accident. It had been a murder. And her father, the man she had just buried, the man who had entrusted her with his empire, was responsible. The weight of this revelation was crushing. She felt a wave of nausea, a surge of anger and grief so intense it threatened to consume her. She wanted to scream, to rage, to destroy everything around her. But she couldn't. She had to remain calm, had to think clearly. She had to figure out what to do, how to avenge her mother's death, how to dismantle the empire that had caused so much pain and suffering. She heard a noise behind her and turned to see Matteo standing in the doorway. He had been watching her, his expression unreadable. "What are you reading?" he asked, his voice low. Bianca quickly closed the box, hiding the letters from his view. "Nothing," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Just old papers." He didn't believe her. He could see the tears in her eyes, the tension in her body. He walked towards her, his gaze fixed on hers. "Bianca," he said, his voice softer now. "What's wrong?" She wanted to tell him, to confide in him, to share the burden of her discovery. But she couldn't. She didn't trust him, not completely. He was her father's man, a part of the world that had killed her mother. "It's nothing, Matteo," she repeated, her voice firmer this time. "I'm just tired." He didn't press her, but his eyes told her that he knew she was lying. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. It was a gesture that had become familiar, a gesture that both comforted and unsettled her. "You don't have to carry this burden alone, Bianca," he said, his voice a low murmur. "I'm here for you. Always." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his. Was it possible he was sincere? Could she trust him, even a little? "I know," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He leaned closer, his breath warm on her face. "Let me help you," he said. "Let me share your pain." Their eyes locked, and for a moment, the world outside faded away. There was only the two of them, bound together by a shared past, by a dangerous present, by an uncertain future. The unspoken words hung heavy between them, the weight of their secrets, their desires, their fears. And in that moment, Bianca knew that she was falling for him again, falling deeper into the darkness, into the forbidden flame that had once consumed them both. The knowledge terrified her, but she was powerless to stop it. The serpent's gaze had ensnared her, and she was lost. The air shifted, however, and she remembered where she was and what she had just read. "I need some air," she said suddenly, pushing back from the desk, from him. The unspoken words remained, heavy and suffocating, a testament to the impossible situation they were both trapped in. Chapter 6. Whispers of the Past. The night air was cool and crisp, a welcome change from the stuffiness of the palazzo. Bianca walked through the gardens, the scent of roses and jasmine filling her senses. The moon was full, casting long, eerie shadows across the manicured lawns and ancient statues. She found a secluded bench beneath a sprawling oak tree, its branches reaching out like protective arms. She sat down, her mind still reeling from the revelation in her mother's letters. Her father, a murderer. Her mother, a victim. Her whole life a lie. She closed her eyes, trying to make sense of it all, trying to reconcile the image of the father she had known, the man who had loved her in his own way, with the cold-blooded killer revealed in those letters. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Matteo approaching. He had followed her, of course. He was always there, watching, waiting, a silent shadow in her life. He sat down beside her, not too close, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, smell the familiar scent of his cologne. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, his voice low. "It's not safe." "Safe?"
Bianca scoffed.
"Is anywhere safe in this life, Matteo?" He didn't answer, simply looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of concern and something else, something she couldn't quite decipher. "I read my mother's letters," she said, her voice barely a whisper. His expression shifted, his eyes becoming guarded. "What letters?" "The letters she wrote to my father," Bianca replied. "Before she died." He remained silent, his gaze fixed on hers, waiting for her to continue. "She knew," Bianca said, her voice choked with emotion. "She knew about his life, about the famiglia, about the danger. She wanted to leave, to take me with her." Matteo's jaw tightened, a muscle flickering in his cheek.
"And?"
"And he killed her," Bianca said, the words a raw, painful cry. "He killed her to stop her from leaving, from taking me away." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Matteo didn't deny it, didn't offer any excuses, any explanations. He simply looked at her, his eyes filled with what? Guilt? Regret? Sadness? "I knew your mother," he finally said, his voice low and rough. "She was a good woman. A kind woman. She didn't deserve what happened to her." His words were a small comfort, a flicker of empathy in the darkness. But they weren't enough. They couldn't erase the pain, the anger, the betrayal she felt. "Did you know?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Did you know what my father had done?" He hesitated, his gaze shifting away from hers. "I suspected," he admitted. "There were rumors, whispers. But I didn't have proof. And I didn't want to believe it." Bianca stared at him, her eyes searching his. He had been loyal to her father, had served him faithfully for years. He had been a part of the world that had killed her mother. Could she ever truly trust him? "Why are you telling me this now?"
she asked.
He looked at her, his eyes dark and intense. "Because you deserve to know the truth," he said. "And because I want you to trust me." "Trust you?" Bianca laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "How can I trust you, Matteo? You were his man. You were part of it all." "I was," he agreed. "But I'm not him. I'm not your father." He reached out and gently touched her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. It was a simple gesture, but it sent a jolt of electricity through her. "I made a promise to protect you, Bianca," he said, his voice low and husky. "And I will keep that promise, no matter what." She looked at him, her heart torn. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust him, wanted to find some solace in his presence, in his strength. But the past loomed between them, a dark, insurmountable barrier. "I don't know if I can," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't push her, didn't try to force her to accept his words. He simply held her gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of determination and vulnerability.
"I understand," he said.
"But I will prove it to you. I will show you that you can trust me." He stood up, his tall frame casting a shadow over her. "Come," he said. "It's late. You need to rest." She followed him back to the palazzo, her mind a whirl of conflicting emotions. She was still reeling from the revelation about her father, still struggling to reconcile her memories with the truth. And she was still drawn to Matteo, despite everything, despite the danger, despite the knowledge that he was a part of the world she had always despised. As they walked, he said quietly, "The letters, do they mention anything else? Anything that might help us understand the current situation?"
Bianca hesitated.
There was one detail, a name mentioned in passing in one of the letters, a name that had stuck in her mind. A name that might be connected to the betrayal her father had warned her about. But she wasn't ready to share that with Matteo, not yet.
"No," she lied.
Nothing important. He didn't press her, but she knew he didn't believe her. The weight of unspoken words, of hidden secrets, hung heavy between them, a constant reminder of the dangerous game they were playing. And as she lay in her bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, she knew that the whispers of the past were only just beginning. They would lead her down a dark and treacherous path, a path where trust was a luxury she could not afford, and where the truth might be more dangerous than any lie. Chapter 7. Masks and Mirrors. The following days were a carefully orchestrated performance. Bianca attended meetings, reviewed documents, and met with various members of the famiglia, all the while playing the role of the grieving daughter, the determined heir, the strong leader. She learned to mask her emotions, to hide her doubts, her fears, her anger. She learned to project an image of confidence, of control, even when she felt like she was drowning in a sea of uncertainty. Mateo was her constant companion, her shadow, her guide. He taught her the unspoken rules of the game, the subtle nuances of power, the art of deception. He showed her how to read people, how to detect lies, how to manipulate situations to her advantage. She learned to observe, to analyze, to question everything. She began to see the cracks in the facade of the Vitali Empire, the hidden tensions, the simmering rivalries, the unspoken betrayals. She realized that her father's world was a labyrinth of masks and mirrors, where nothing was as it seemed, where everyone had a hidden agenda. One afternoon, she was summoned to a meeting with Don Carlo Rossi, the head of the rival Rossi family. It was a tense encounter, a delicate dance of diplomacy and veiled threats. Rossi was an old man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles and scars, his eyes cold and calculating. He made no secret of his disdain for Bianca, for her youth, her inexperience, her gender. "You are a child playing at a grown man's game," he said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "You have no idea what you're doing." Bianca met his gaze, her expression unwavering. "I am a Vitali," she replied, her voice calm and steady. "And I will not be intimidated by you, Don Rossi." Matteo stood behind her, a silent, imposing presence, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of a knife concealed beneath his jacket. It was a subtle gesture, but it was enough to make Rossi pause, to reconsider his approach. The meeting ended without any resolution, without any agreement. It was clear that the rivalry between the two families would continue, that the threat of war was ever present. After Rossi left, Bianca turned to Matteo. "He hates me," she said. "He respects you," Matteo corrected. "He sees you as a threat. That's more important."
Bianca sighed.
"This whole thing is a charade, isn't it? We're all just pretending, playing roles, hiding our true intentions." Matteo nodded. "That's the nature of this world, Bianca. Everyone wears a mask. The key is to see through them." "And what about you, Matteo?" she asked, her eyes searching his. "What mask are you wearing?" He smiled, a slow, enigmatic smile that sent a shiver down her spine. "That, Cara," he said, "is for you to figure out." Later that evening, Bianca found herself alone in her father's study again. She was drawn to the room, to the secrets it held, to the answers she hoped to find. She opened the antique box and took out her mother's letters again, rereading them, searching for any clue, any detail she might have missed. She noticed something she hadn't noticed before. In one of the letters, her mother mentioned a meeting, a secret rendezvous with someone she referred to only as R. "I'm meeting R tomorrow," the letter said. "He says he has information that could help us. He says he knows a way out of this mess." Who was R? Was it someone within the famiglia? Someone who had betrayed her father? Someone who had helped her mother? Or someone who had lured her to her death? Bianca felt a surge of excitement, a flicker of hope. This could be the key, the missing piece of the puzzle. She had to find out who R was. She decided to confide in Matteo, to share this new information with him. She found him in the library, reading a book by the fire. "Matteo," she said, "I need to talk to you." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "What is it?" She hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "I found something in my mother's letters," she said. "A name. Or rather, an initial. R." She explained about the secret meeting, about the promise of information, of a way out. Matteo listened intently, his expression serious. "This could be significant," he said. "It could be the link we've been looking for." "But who is R?" Bianca asked. "How do we find out?" Matteo thought for a moment, his brow furrowed. "There are a few possibilities," he said. "It could be someone within the famiglia, someone close to your father. Or it could be someone outside, someone with connections to other organizations." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her. "We need to be careful, Bianca," he said. "This could be dangerous. Whoever R is, they may not want their identity revealed." "I know," she said. "But I have to find out. I have to know the truth about my mother's death." He nodded, his eyes filled with understanding.
"We'll do it together," he said.
"We'll find and we'll uncover the truth." The resolve in his voice, the protective glint in his eyes, it gave her a flicker of hope, a sliver of trust. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone in this. Maybe, together, they could navigate this labyrinth of masks and mirrors and find their way to the truth. But as she looked into his eyes, a nagging doubt remained. Could she truly trust him? Or was he just another player in this deadly game, wearing a mask she couldn't see through? The question hung in the air, unanswered, a constant reminder of the precariousness of her position, the fragility of their alliance. Chapter 8. The Dance of Deception. The search for R began discreetly, a clandestine investigation conducted in the shadows, away from the prying eyes of the Famiglia. Bianca and Matteo worked together, sifting through old records, interviewing former associates of her father, following up on any lead, no matter how small. They discovered that there was a recurring figure in her father's past, a name that appeared in several documents, always in a cryptic, coded way. It was clear that there was someone important, someone with influence, someone her father both trusted and feared. Their investigation led them to a former capo, a man named Ricardo, who had been exiled from the Famiglia years ago for a minor infraction. Ricardo lived in a small, secluded village in the mountains, a forgotten man, living a quiet, solitary life. Bianca and Matteo traveled to the village, posing as researchers studying the history of the region. They found Ricardo working in his small garden, his hands calloused from years of hard labor, his face weathered by the sun and the wind. He was wary of them at first, suspicious of their questions. But Bianca, using the skills Matteo had taught her, managed to gain his trust, to convince him that they were not a threat. "I knew your father," Ricardo said, his voice raspy. "He was a hard man, a ruthless man. But he was also fair in his own way." "We're trying to understand his past," Bianca said. "We're looking for someone he knew, someone he referred to as R." Ricardo's eyes narrowed. "R," he repeated, the name a whisper on his lips. "That's a name I haven't heard in a long time. Do you know who it is?" Matteo asked, his voice low and steady. Ricardo hesitated, his gaze shifting between Bianca and Matteo. He was clearly weighing the risks, the potential consequences of revealing what he knew. R, he finally said, was Renzo Bellini. Bianca and Matteo exchanged a look. The name was unfamiliar to Bianca, but Matteo's reaction was telling. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkened. "Bellini," he said, his voice a low growl. "I should have known."
"Who is he?"
Bianca asked. "He was your father's lawyer," Matteo replied. "His most trusted advisor. The man who handled all his legal affairs." Bianca was stunned. Renzo Bellini, a lawyer? It seemed impossible. Lawyers were supposed to uphold the law, not break it. "But why would my mother be meeting with him?" she asked. "Why would he be offering her a way out?" Ricardo shrugged. "Bellini was a complicated man," he said. "He played both sides. He had connections to everyone. The Famiglia, the police, the government. He was a master manipulator." "And where is he now?" Matteo asked. Ricardo shook his head.
"I don't know," he said.
"He disappeared years ago, after your mother died. Some say he went into hiding, fearing your father's wrath. Others say he was silenced." Bianca felt a chill run down her spine. Silenced. The word echoed in her mind, a stark reminder of the danger they were facing. They left Ricardo and returned to Florence, their minds racing with this new information. Renzo Bellini, the missing lawyer, the man who might hold the key to her mother's death, to the betrayal her father had warned her about. "We need to find him," Bianca said, her voice determined.
"It won't be easy," Matteo replied.
"He's been in hiding for years. He's a master of disguise, of deception. But we have to try," Bianca insisted. "He's the only one who can tell us the truth." That evening they discussed their next move. The fire in the hearth was a small point of warmth in the large library. Bellini was more than a lawyer. He held too much sway. He was too connected, Matteo remarked, pacing slowly. Bianca watched, the subtle play of his muscles beneath his shirt, a constant distraction. She had to keep focus. Ricardo said he disappeared after my mother's death. That's more than coincidence. Agreed. He stopped pacing. He held your father's secrets. He was likely privy to everything. So he was either running from my father or someone else silenced him to protect my father.
Bianca mused.
The implications were terrifying. Matteo gave a curt nod. Either way, he's the key. We find Bellini. We likely unravel the whole conspiracy. But how? She asked, feeling the weight of the seemingly impossible task. We start where he left off. His contacts, his known associates.
Someone knows something.
He met her gaze, a flicker of steel in his eyes. We just need to find the right person to persuade. The dance of deception had begun. They were stepping deeper into the labyrinth, closer to the truth, but also closer to danger. And as Bianca looked at Matteo, she knew that she was relying on a man who was a master of this very dance, a man whose own secrets might be as dangerous as those they were trying to uncover. The risk was immense, but the need for truth, for justice, burned brighter than her fear. Chapter 9. Cracks in the Facade. The hunt for Renzo Bellini led Bianca and Matteo down a rabbit hole of hidden connections and long-forgotten alliances. They spent days poring over old files, interviewing former associates of Bellini, and following up on dead-end leads. They discovered that Bellini had been a man of immense power and influence, a man who had his fingers in many pies, a man who had made a lot of enemies. They also discovered that he had a secret life, a hidden world of gambling debts, illicit affairs, and shady deals. He had been living on the edge, playing a dangerous game, juggling multiple loyalties, constantly risking exposure. One evening, while reviewing some old financial records, Bianca noticed a pattern of suspicious transactions, a series of large sums of money being transferred to offshore accounts. The accounts were registered under various shell corporations, but Bianca, using her newly acquired knowledge of her father's business dealings, recognized the names of some of the companies.
They were linked to the Rossi family.
She showed the records to Matteo. "Look at this," she said. "These transactions, they coincide with the time of my mother's death." Matteo studied the records, his brow furrowed. "It's circumstantial," he said, "but it's definitely suspicious. It suggests that Bellini may have been working with the Rossis, that he may have betrayed your father." Bianca felt a surge of anger, a burning desire for revenge. The Rossis, her family's sworn enemies, involved in her mother's death? It was almost too much to bear. "We need to confront them," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "We need to demand answers." Matteo shook his head. "Not yet," he said. "We don't have enough proof. We need to be careful. If we accuse them without concrete evidence, they'll deny everything, and we'll lose our advantage." He was right, of course. She knew that. But her emotions were getting the better of her. She was tired of the secrets, the lies, the deception. She wanted justice, she wanted revenge, and she wanted it now. "What do we do then?" she asked, her voice frustrated. "We keep digging," Matteo replied. "We find more evidence. We build a case. And then, when we're ready, we strike." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her. "I know it's hard, Bianca," he said. "But you need to be patient. You need to be strategic. You need to think like your father." His words stung. Think like her father? The man who had killed her mother? The man who had built an empire on blood and betrayal? She didn't want to think like him. She wanted to be different, to be better. "I'm not my father, Matteo," she said, her voice cold. He looked at her, his eyes filled with what? Understanding?
Pity?
She couldn't tell. "No," he said. "You're not. But you have his strength, his cunning, his determination. Use it." He was right, of course. She had inherited those qualities, whether she wanted them or not. And she needed to use them, to survive, to succeed, to get justice for her mother. Later that day, they received a tip from one of their informants, a former associate of Bellini who had fallen on hard times. The informant claimed that Bellini had a secret hideout, a villa in the countryside, where he used to go to escape the pressures of his life, to conduct his clandestine affairs. Bianca and Matteo decided to investigate. They drove to the villa, a secluded, sprawling property surrounded by high walls and dense trees. The place was deserted, seemingly abandoned for years. They entered the villa cautiously, their senses on high alert. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. The furniture was covered in sheets. The paintings on the walls were faded and cracked. It was a ghost house, a relic of a bygone era. They searched the villa, room by room, looking for any clue, any sign of Bellini's presence. They found nothing at first. But then, in a hidden room behind a bookcase in the library, they discovered a safe. Matteo, using his skills as a former enforcer, managed to crack the safe. Inside, they found a collection of documents, photographs, and recordings. It was a treasure trove of information, a window into Bellini's secret life. As they began to sift through the contents of the safe, Bianca felt a growing sense of unease. The more they learned about Bellini, the more she realized how dangerous he had been, how deeply involved he had been in the darkest corners of her father's world. And then they found it, a single photograph, tucked away in a folder at the bottom of the safe. A photograph of Bellini, standing with Don Carlo Rossi. They were both smiling, shaking hands, like old friends. The photograph was dated just a few weeks before her mother's death. Bianca stared at the photograph, her mind reeling. It was the proof they had been looking for, the concrete evidence linking Bellini to the Rossis, to her mother's murder. The facade was cracking. The masks were slipping. The truth was finally emerging, and it was more painful, more devastating than she could have ever imagined. She looked at Matteo. The confirmation was there, in his hardened gaze, the slight clench of his jaw. The enemy had been identified. The next move was theirs. And it would be decisive. Chapter 10. A Glimmer of Truth. The photograph was a turning point. It was the smoking gun, the irrefutable evidence that linked Bellini to the Rossis and, by implication, to her mother's murder. Bianca felt a surge of cold fury, a burning desire for retribution. But she also felt a flicker of fear. This discovery had raised the stakes, made the game even more dangerous. "We need to be careful," Matteo said, his voice low and cautious. "This is explosive. If the Rossis find out we have this, they won't," Bianca said, her voice firm. "We'll use it to our advantage. We'll expose them, destroy them." She was surprised by her own ruthlessness, by the cold determination that had taken root in her heart. She was becoming more like her father than she cared to admit. They spent the next few days meticulously analyzing the documents and recordings they had found in Bellini's safe. They discovered a complex web of illicit dealings, of bribes, payoffs, and conspiracies. They learned that Bellini had been playing a double game, working for both the Vitales and the Rossis, betraying both families for his own personal gain. They also discovered that Bellini had been deeply in debt to the Rossis, owing them a vast sum of money. He had been desperate, trapped, willing to do anything to escape his predicament. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. Bianca's mother had discovered Bellini's treachery, had threatened to expose him. Bellini, fearing for his life, had conspired with the Rossis to silence her. Her father, unaware of Bellini's betrayal, had been devastated by his wife's death, had unknowingly harbored a viper in his bosom. Bianca felt a profound sense of sadness, of loss, of betrayal. Her whole life had been a lie, built on a foundation of secrets and deception. She had trusted her father, had loved him, despite his flaws. And he, in turn, had failed to protect her mother, had failed to see the danger lurking in his own inner circle. She looked at Matteo, her eyes filled with tears. "It's all so ugly," she said, her voice choked with emotion. He reached out and gently touched her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. It was a gesture of comfort, of support, a silent acknowledgement of her pain. "I know," he said, his voice soft. "But we're close to the truth now. We're close to getting justice for your mother." His words gave her strength, renewed her determination. She would not give up, would not let the past consume her. She would fight for her mother, for her family, for her own future. They decided to use the information they had gathered to their advantage, to sow discord between the Rossis and the other families, to weaken their position, to isolate them. They leaked snippets of information to their allies, to their informants, to the police, planting seeds of doubt, of suspicion. They watched as the cracks in the facade of the Rossi Empire began to widen, as their allies began to question their loyalty, as the police began to close in. One evening, Bianca received a message, an anonymous note delivered by a courier. The note was short, cryptic, but its meaning was clear. Meet me at the Ponte Vecchio tomorrow night at midnight. I have information about Bellini. Come alone. Bianca's heart skipped a beat. Who was this mysterious informant? Could it be Bellini himself? Or was it a trap? She showed the note to Matteo. What do you think?
She asked.
He studied the note, his brow furrowed.
It's risky, he said.
It could be a setup. But it could also be our chance to find Bellini, Bianca said. To finally get the answers we need. She knew it was dangerous, that she was putting herself at risk. But she was willing to take that risk, to face whatever danger lay ahead. I'm going, she said, her voice firm. Matteo looked at her, his eyes filled with concern. I'm going with you, he said. No, Bianca said. The note said to come alone. If you're there, it might scare them off. He hesitated, his jaw tightening. He didn't like the idea of her going alone, of putting herself in danger. But he knew she was right. All right, he said reluctantly. But be careful. And if anything happens, anything at all, get out of there immediately. He gave her a small, discreet tracking device, a tiny chip that she could conceal in her clothing. Just in case, he said. As Bianca looked at the device, a glimmer of truth emerged amidst the chaos. She was placing her trust, her safety, in Matteo's hands. A man she barely knew, a man shrouded in secrets, was now her lifeline. The irony was not lost on her. She nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the risk, of the trust, of the unspoken bond that was growing between them. She would go alone, into the darkness, to face the unknown. But she would not be alone. Matteo would be watching, waiting, ready to protect her. And that, she realized, was all that mattered. The glimmer of truth was this. She was no longer alone in this fight. Chapter 11. The Price of Loyalty. Bianca arrived at the Ponte Vecchio just before midnight. The ancient bridge, usually bustling with tourists and shoppers, was deserted, eerily quiet. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the Arno River against the stone pillars. The air was cool and damp, and a thin mist hung over the water, obscuring the lights of the city. Bianca pulled her coat tighter around her, her senses on high alert. She scanned the bridge, looking for any sign of her mysterious informant. She saw a figure standing in the shadows, near the center of the bridge. A man, tall and slender, his face obscured by the darkness. She approached him cautiously, her hand resting on the small, discreet weapon Matteo had given her, a tiny pistol concealed in her pocket. As she got closer, she recognized the figure. It was not Bellini. It was someone she knew, someone she had trusted, someone she had considered a friend. It was Alessandro, one of her father's most trusted capos, a man who had been like an uncle to her when she was a child.
Alessandro?
She said, her voice a mixture of surprise and confusion. What are you doing here? He stepped out of the shadows, his face revealed in the dim light. He looked older, wearier, his eyes filled with a sadness she had never seen before. Bianca, he said, his voice low and somber. I needed to see you. Alone. You sent the note?
She asked.
He nodded. I have information, he said. About Bellini. About your mother. Bianca's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for. The truth. Tell me, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Alessandro looked around, his eyes darting nervously. Not here, he said. It's not safe. Follow me. He led her off the bridge, down a narrow, winding alleyway, to a small, nondescript building. It was a bar, closed for the night, the windows dark and shuttered. He unlocked the door and ushered her inside. The air was stale, smelling of stale beer and cigarette smoke. He led her to a back room, a small, dimly lit space furnished with a few rickety tables and chairs. Sit, he said, gesturing to a chair. Bianca sat down, her eyes fixed on Alessandro. He looked nervous, agitated, his hands trembling slightly. "What do you know?" she asked, her voice urgent. He took a deep breath, his gaze meeting hers. "I know the truth," he said. "About your mother's death. About Bellini. About everything." He paused, his eyes filling with tears. "I was there," he said. "The night your mother died. I was the one who drove the car." Bianca stared at him, her mind reeling.
Alessandro?
He had been the driver? But he had always been so loyal, so devoted to her father. It didn't make sense.
But why?
She asked, her voice trembling. Alessandro looked down, his shoulders slumping. "Your father ordered it," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "He told me to make it look like an accident." Bianca felt a wave of nausea, a surge of anger and grief so intense it threatened to overwhelm her. Her father. He had lied to her, had deceived her, had betrayed her. But why would he do that? She asked, her voice barely audible. Alessandro hesitated, his gaze shifting away from hers. He found out about your mother's plan," he said. "To leave him, to take you with her. He couldn't allow that. He loved you, Bianca.
In his own way.
He didn't want to lose you." Bianca shook her head, her mind unable to process the information. Her father, a monster. Her mother, a victim. And Alessandro, a pawn in their deadly game.
And Bellini? She asked.
What was his role? Alessandro looked up, his eyes filled with fear. Bellini, he was the one who arranged it, he said. He was the one who contacted the Rossis, who set it all up. He was playing both sides, betraying your father, betraying everyone. It was all coming together now. The pieces of the puzzle, fitting together to form a horrifying picture. But why are you telling me this now? Bianca asked. After all these years? Alessandro looked at her, his eyes filled with remorse. Because I can't live with it anymore, he said. The guilt, it's been eating me alive. And I wanted you to know the truth. You deserve to know. He reached inside his jacket pocket and took out a small, folded piece of paper and a data chip. He handed it to Bianca. This is evidence. It has some information about their dealings. And the paper contains Bellini's current location. I overheard a conversation a few weeks ago. He's not as well hidden as he thinks. Bianca takes it.
Why?
Why would you risk this? Alessandro sighed, a weariness etched on his face. Your father, he was a complicated man. But he also instilled loyalty in those who served him. Loyalty and a code. What Bellini did, betraying your mother, betraying the famiglia, it violated that code. And even after all this time, it needs to be answered. Bianca stared at him, her heart aching. Alessandro, a man torn between loyalty and conscience, a man who had carried this burden for years, a man who was now risking his life to help her. Suddenly, a sharp, cracking sound broke the quiet. It was the sound of a silenced gunshot. Alessandro gasped, his eyes widening in surprise and pain. He clutched his chest, a crimson stain spreading across his shirt. He slumped forward, collapsing onto the table. Bianca screamed, her mind reeling in shock and horror. She looked around, her eyes frantically searching for the shooter. But the room was empty. The shot had come from outside through the window. She rushed to Alessandro's side, her hands trembling. She checked for a pulse, but it was too late. He was gone. She heard footsteps outside, the sound of someone running away. She grabbed the small pistol Matteo had given her and ran to the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She peered out into the alleyway, but it was empty. The shooter had vanished. Bianca stood there, frozen in shock and grief, clutching Alessandro's lifeless hand. She had come so close to the truth, only to have it snatched away from her, replaced by another tragedy, another betrayal. The price of loyalty, she realized, was often paid in blood. And she was now, more than ever, caught in a deadly game, a game where the stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined, and where the truth might cost her everything. Chapter 12. Between Two Worlds. Bianca stood in the dimly lit bar, the silence deafening after the gunshot, Alessandro's lifeless body a stark reminder of the brutal reality she was now fully immersed in. The small data chip and the folded piece of paper felt heavy in her hand, tokens of a truth that had cost Alessandro his life. She stumbled back, away from the scene, her mind racing. She needed to get out, to get to safety, to contact Matteo. She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She dialed Matteo's number, her breath coming in ragged gasps. He answered on the first ring, his voice calm and steady.
"Bianca?" he said.
"What's wrong?"
"Alessandro," she stammered. He's dead."
"Someone shot him. He told me everything. About my mother, about Bellini." She couldn't continue, her voice choked with sobs. "Where are you?" Matteo asked, his voice sharp, urgent. She told him the location, her voice trembling.
"Stay there," he said. "Don't move."
"I'm on my way." Bianca waited, huddled in a corner of the bar, her mind numb with shock and grief. She clutched the small pistol, her only protection, her only comfort. Matteo arrived within minutes, his face a mask of controlled fury. He took one look at the scene, at Alessandro's body, at Bianca's terrified expression, and his jaw tightened. He knelt beside her, his hand gently touching her arm. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice soft. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face.
"He's gone, Matteo," she said. "He's gone."
And it's my fault." "No," Matteo said firmly. "It's not your fault. It's the fault of the people who did this. The people who are trying to hide the truth." He helped her to her feet, his arms supporting her. "We need to get out of here," he said. "Before they come back." They left the bar, slipping out into the night, disappearing into the maze of narrow streets and alleyways. Matteo led her to a safe house, a small, nondescript apartment in a quiet neighborhood, a place where they could regroup, where they could plan their next move. Once inside, Bianca finally allowed herself to break down. She collapsed onto a sofa, her body shaking with sobs. Matteo held her, his arms wrapped around her, offering her comfort, support, a silent promise of protection. "It's all right, Bianca," he said, his voice soothing. "You're safe now. I'm here." She clung to him, her tears soaking his shirt. She felt lost, broken, overwhelmed by the weight of her grief, by the brutality of this world she had been thrust into. After a while, her sobs subsided, replaced by a quiet, hollow ache. She pulled away from Matteo, wiping her eyes. "He gave me this," she said, holding up the data chip and folded paper. "He said it was evidence. About Bellini. About my mother." Matteo took the items, his eyes serious. He examined the paper, unfolding it carefully. It was a handwritten note, a series of numbers and letters, a coded address. "This is Bellini's location," he said. "Alessandro must have found out where he was hiding." He then inserted the data chip into a laptop and a file opened, revealing a series of documents, emails, and financial records. It was a detailed account of Bellini's dealings with the Rossis, confirming his involvement in her mother's murder, outlining the conspiracy that had shattered her life. Bianca stared at the screen, her mind numb. It was all there, in black and white, the undeniable proof of Bellini's treachery, of the Rossis' guilt, of her father's complicity. "We have them," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We finally have them." Matteo nodded, his eyes dark and intense. "Yes," he said, "but we need to be careful. We need to use this information strategically. We need to make sure they pay for what they've done." She felt torn. The world she had known, the safe life she thought she'd left behind, was now inextricably linked to the ruthless mafia world. And Matteo was right there in the middle, straddling both. "This changes everything, Matteo," Bianca whispered, looking at him, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. "It does," he agreed, his gaze holding hers. "I'm not just fighting for my mother anymore. I'm fighting for everyone who's been hurt by this."
"By them."
He nodded. "And I will be by your side, every step of the way." The promise hung in the air, a fragile thread of hope in the midst of the darkness. She was caught between two worlds, the world of her past, the world of her present, the world of her future. And she knew that she could no longer stand on the sidelines, that she had to choose a side, that she had to fight. She looked at Matteo, her eyes filled with a newfound determination. "What do we do next?"
she asked.
He smiled, a slow, predatory smile that sent a shiver down her spine. "We make them pay," he said. "We make them all pay." And in that moment, Bianca knew that she had crossed a line, that she had stepped fully into the darkness, that she was no longer just Bianca Vitali, the reluctant heiress. She was a warrior, a fighter, a woman determined to avenge her mother's death, to destroy her enemies, to reclaim her legacy. She was caught between two worlds, and she would navigate them both, with Matteo by her side, until justice was served. Chapter 13. The Unraveling Thread. With Bellini's location in hand and the incriminating evidence from the data chip, Bianca and Matteo began to plan their next move. They knew they had to be careful, strategic, and ruthless. They were dealing with powerful enemies, people who would stop at nothing to protect their interests, to silence anyone who threatened them. They decided to leak the information about Bellini's location and the evidence of his dealings with the Rossis to a select group of contacts, a few trusted journalists, a few honest cops, a few influential politicians who were not in the Rossis' pocket. They wanted to create a storm of public outrage, a wave of pressure that would force the authorities to act, that would make it impossible for the Rossis to escape justice. They worked in secret, communicating through encrypted channels, meeting in discreet locations, always careful to cover their tracks. They knew they were being watched, that their every move was being scrutinized by their enemies. As the information began to spread, as the rumors began to swirl, as the pressure began to mount, Bianca felt a sense of anticipation, a flicker of hope. She was finally taking control, finally fighting back, finally making a difference. But she also felt a sense of unease, a nagging doubt. Something didn't feel right. The pieces of the puzzle, while fitting together, seemed too perfect, too convenient. One evening, while reviewing the documents from Bellini's safe again, she noticed something she had missed before. A small detail, a seemingly insignificant note scribbled in the margin of one of the financial records. The note read, "Project Nightingale Phase 2 initiated." Project Nightingale? What was that? And what did it mean by Phase 2? She showed the note to Matteo. "Have you seen this before?"
she asked.
He studied the note, his brow furrowed.
"No," he said.
"I don't recognize it. It's connected to Bellini, to the Rossis," Bianca said. "It has to be important." They began to investigate, searching for any reference to Project Nightingale in the other documents, in the recordings, in their online databases. They found nothing. It was as if the term had been deliberately erased, wiped clean from the record. But Bianca was persistent. She knew, instinctively, that this was the key, the missing piece of the puzzle, the thread that would unravel the whole conspiracy. She decided to contact one of her sources, a former intelligence officer who had connections to various government agencies, a man who had helped her in the past. She met with him in a discreet location, a small cafe in a quiet neighborhood. "I need your help," she said. "I need to find out what Project Nightingale is." The former officer looked at her, his eyes serious. "That's a dangerous path you're walking, Bianca," he said. "That name, it's associated with some very powerful people, some very dark secrets." "I know," Bianca said. "But I need to know the truth. It's connected to my mother's death, to a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of power." The officer hesitated, his gaze shifting around the cafe, as if checking for eavesdroppers. "All right," he said reluctantly. "I'll see what I can find out. But it will take time.
And it will be risky."
Bianca thanked him, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she was playing a dangerous game, that she was risking her life, her future. But she was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. As she left the cafe, she felt a sense of foreboding, a feeling that she was getting closer to the truth, but also closer to danger. The unraveling thread was leading her down a dark and treacherous path, a path where the stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined. She looked up at the sky, the clouds gathering, a storm brewing on the horizon. It was a reflection of her own inner turmoil, of the chaos that was swirling around her. And she knew that the storm was about to break, that the truth was about to be revealed, and that it would change everything. The carefully constructed plan felt precarious. The ease with which they'd found Bellini's location, the convenient evidence, it was all starting to feel orchestrated. But by whom? And for what purpose? These questions gnawed at Bianca, fueling a growing sense of unease that even Matteo's presence couldn't fully dispel. Chapter 14. A Storm of Betrayal. The storm broke sooner than Bianca expected. It came in the form of a phone call, a frantic message from one of her informants, a warning that the Rossis were planning a major move, a preemptive strike against the Vitales. They know about Bellini, the informant said, his voice panicked. They know you have the evidence. They're coming for you, Bianca. They're coming for everyone. Bianca's blood ran cold. How had the Rossis found out? Had they been betrayed? Was there a mole within their ranks? She immediately contacted Matteo, relaying the information, urging him to take precautions, to protect their allies, to secure the palazzo. I'll handle it, Matteo said, his voice calm and steady, despite the urgency of the situation. You stay put. Stay safe. Bianca wanted to argue, to insist on joining him, on fighting alongside him. But she knew he was right. She was the primary target, the one the Rossis wanted most. She had to stay hidden, had to protect herself, for the sake of the famiglia, for the sake of the future. She waited, anxiously, in the safe house, her mind racing, her heart pounding. She tried to contact her other informants, her allies, but many of their lines were dead, their phones unanswered. It was as if a wave of silence had descended upon the city, a sign that the Rossis were already making their move. Hours passed, stretching into an eternity. The silence was broken only by the occasional sound of sirens in the distance, the muffled roar of helicopters overhead. The city was on edge, a war zone waiting to explode. Finally, Matteo contacted her, his voice strained, exhausted. It's bad, Bianca, he said. The Rossis hit multiple locations. They were coordinated, ruthless. We lost a lot of people. Bianca's heart sank. She felt a wave of grief, of guilt, of responsibility. She had started this, had set this chain of events in motion. And now people were dying because of it. What about Bellini? She asked, her voice trembling. Gone, Matteo said. They got to him first. His hideout, it was empty. They must have moved him, or worse. Bianca felt a surge of despair. They had been so close to getting the truth, to getting justice. And now, it had all slipped away, vanished into the darkness. What do we do now? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Matteo hesitated, his voice heavy with uncertainty. I don't know, he said. We've lost our advantage. The Rossis have the upper hand. We're outgunned, outmaneuvered. It was the first time she had heard him sound defeated, the first time she had sensed a flicker of doubt in his voice. It terrified her. There has to be something, she said, her voice desperate. We can't give up. We can't let them win. She remembered the note, the cryptic message she had found in Bellini's safe. Project Nightingale Phase 2 initiated. Project Nightingale, she said, her voice urgent. We need to find out what it is. It's the key, Matteo. I know it. Matteo was silent for a moment, then his voice, regaining some of its strength, said, all right, we'll focus on that. But we need to be even more careful now. We're running out of time. And we're running out of allies. As if on cue, a sudden, sharp knock on the door echoed through the safe house. Bianca and Matteo exchanged a look, their eyes filled with alarm. Who could it be? Matteo moved silently towards the door, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. He peered through the peephole, his expression shifting from suspicion to surprise. He opened the door and Bianca's heart stopped. Standing in the doorway, his face grim, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and betrayal, was the former intelligence officer, her source, the man she had trusted to help her uncover the truth about Project Nightingale. You, Matteo said, his voice a low growl. The officer stepped inside, his gaze fixed on Bianca. I'm sorry, Bianca, he said. But it's over. You need to come with me. Behind him, several armed men emerged from the shadows, their weapons trained on Bianca and Matteo. The storm of betrayal had arrived, and it was far more devastating than she could have ever imagined. The look in Matteo's eyes, a mixture of fury and heartbreak, told her everything. He had been betrayed too. They both had. And now they were trapped. Chapter 15. The Heart's Reckoning. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Bianca stared at the former intelligence officer, the man she had trusted, the man who had now betrayed her, his face a mask of cold indifference.
Why?
She asked, her voice barely a whisper, her heart aching with the sting of betrayal. It's complicated, Bianca, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Let's just say I have my own loyalties, my own obligations. Loyalties to whom? Matteo demanded, his voice a dangerous growl, his hand still gripping his weapon, ready to fight, even though they were outnumbered, outgunned. The officer ignored him, his gaze fixed on Bianca. Project Nightingale, he said. It's bigger than you, Bianca. Bigger than your family, bigger than the Rossis. It's a national security matter. And you stumbled into something you shouldn't have. Bianca's mind raced. Project Nightingale, a national security matter? What had her mother stumbled upon? What secrets had Bellini been privy to? What was so important that it justified murder, betrayal, a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of power? I don't understand, she said, her voice trembling. You don't need to understand, the officer said. You just need to come with us. We'll take care of you. Take care of me?
Bianca scoffed.
Like you took care of Alessandro? Like you took care of my mother? The officer's expression hardened. Don't make this difficult, Bianca, he said. It doesn't have to end badly. Just cooperate. Bianca looked at Matteo, her eyes pleading for help, for guidance. He met her gaze, his expression a mixture of fury and desperation. He knew they were trapped, that there was no way out. But he wouldn't give up. He wouldn't let them take her. We're not going anywhere, he said, his voice firm, his hand tightening around his weapon. The officer sighed.
I was hoping you'd say that, he said.
He nodded to his men, and they moved forward, their weapons raised. Bianca braced herself for the inevitable, for the violence, for the end. But then something unexpected happened. Matteo moved with lightning speed, disarming one of the men, grabbing his weapon, using him as a shield. He fired a shot, hitting another man, creating a moment of chaos, a window of opportunity. Run, Bianca, he yelled. Get out of here. Bianca didn't hesitate. She ran, dodging the remaining men, scrambling towards the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She heard more gunshots behind her, the sounds of a struggle, Matteo's voice yelling her name. She burst out of the safe house, into the night, her lungs burning, her legs pumping. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she had to get away, to escape, to survive. She ran blindly, through the dark streets, the sounds of the city fading behind her. She didn't stop, didn't look back, until she reached a small, secluded park, a hidden oasis of calm in the midst of the chaos. She collapsed onto a bench, gasping for breath, her body shaking with adrenaline and fear. She was alone again. Matteo was gone, possibly captured, possibly dead. She felt a wave of despair, of hopelessness. She had lost everything. Her family, her friends, her allies, her love. She had fallen for Matteo, despite everything, despite the danger, despite the secrets, despite the betrayal. She had allowed herself to trust him, to rely on him, to love him. And now he was gone. Bianca broke down, sobbing, her cries lost in the vastness and the quiet of the park. She was so close to the truth, close to revealing this entire conspiracy, this Project Nightingale, only to be betrayed by someone she thought she could trust. Just when all hope seemed lost, her phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. Don't give up. Meet me at the old observatory. Midnight. Her heart leaped. Matteo. He was alive. He had escaped. He had a plan. A flicker of hope, a spark of determination, reignited within her. She wasn't defeated. She wasn't alone. She would fight. She would survive. She would get justice. She wiped her tears, her resolve hardening. She had a meeting to attend, a truth to uncover, a love to reclaim. The heart's reckoning was at hand, and she would face it, Head on, with courage, with determination, with the unwavering belief that even in the darkest of nights, hope could still prevail. Chapter 16. Scars of the Soul. Bianca arrived at the old observatory just before midnight. The building, a relic of a bygone era, stood on a hill overlooking the city, its silhouette a dark, imposing shape against the night sky. It was a perfect meeting place, secluded, isolated, offering a panoramic view of the surrounding area. She climbed the winding stairs to the observation deck, her heart pounding in her chest, her senses on high alert. She scanned the area, looking for any sign of Matteo or any sign of danger. She saw him then, standing in the shadows, near the large, antique telescope. He was injured, his clothes torn and bloodstained, his face bruised and battered. But he was alive. She rushed to him, her arms wrapping around him, holding him tight. "Matteo," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You're alive. I thought I'd lost you." He held her close, his body trembling. "I'm here, Bianca," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'm here." They stood there for a moment, clinging to each other, finding solace in their shared embrace, in their renewed connection. The scars of the soul, the wounds of betrayal and loss, were still fresh, still raw. But they were together, and that was all that mattered. Finally, Bianca pulled away, her eyes searching his. "How did you escape?" she asked. "It wasn't easy," he said, his voice grim. "I had to fight my way out. But I managed to get away. I left a message for you, hoping you'd get it." "I did," she said. "But what happened back there? Who were those men? Why did that officer betray us?" Matteo sighed, his gaze shifting away from hers. "It's a long story, Bianca," he said. "A complicated story. And it's connected to my past. To secrets I've kept hidden for years." Bianca's heart skipped a beat. His past. The secrets he had always alluded to, the darkness he had always carried within him. It was all coming to a head now. "Tell me," she said, her voice firm. "I need to know. I deserve to know." He hesitated, his jaw tightening. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and regret. "Before I joined your father's famiglia," he began, his voice low and rough, "I worked for another organization. A government agency. A secret branch, involved in covert operations. Project Nightingale was one of their operations." Bianca stared at him, her mind reeling. Matteo, a former government agent? It was almost impossible to believe. "What is Project Nightingale?" she asked. "It was a surveillance program," he said. "A highly classified project designed to monitor certain individuals, certain groups, deemed a threat to national security. Your mother," she stumbled upon it. "She discovered evidence of illegal activities, of corruption, of abuse of power." "And Bellini?" Bianca asked. "What was his role?" "Bellini was our liaison," Matteo replied. "He was the one who funneled information to us, who helped us cover our tracks. He was playing both sides, working for your father, working for us, betraying everyone." Bianca felt a surge of anger, of betrayal. Her own government, involved in this conspiracy? Her mother, a victim of their ruthlessness? It was too much to bear. "And that officer," she said. "The one who betrayed us, he's one of them?" Matteo nodded. "He's my former handler," he said. "The man who recruited me, who trained me, who controlled me." "He said it was a national security matter," Bianca said. "That I shouldn't have gotten involved." "He's lying," Matteo said. "It's not about national security. It's about covering up their crimes. It's about protecting their power." He took a deep breath. "When I left the agency, I thought I was out. I thought I could escape that life. But they never let you go. They always have something on you. They always have a way to pull you back in. And that's why you stayed with my father," even after Bianca asked, not needing to finish the sentence. Matteo nodded, his gaze meeting hers, full of pain and regret. "I was protecting you, Bianca. From them. And from your father's enemies. I made a promise. And I fell in love with you." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken emotions, with the weight of their shared past, with the uncertainty of their future. Bianca's heart ached. She had known, deep down, that he cared for her. But to hear him say it, to see the vulnerability in his eyes, it changed everything. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice soft. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a newfound determination. "We expose them," he said. "We expose Project Nightingale. We expose their crimes. We get justice for your mother, for Alessandro, for everyone who has suffered because of them." He reached into his pocket and took out a small, encrypted data chip. "I managed to get this from my former handler," he said. "It contains everything. All the evidence we need. Proof of their illegal activities, their corruption, their murders." Bianca stared at the chip, her heart filled with a mixture of hope and fear. It was the key, the weapon that could bring down the entire conspiracy. But it was also a target, something that would make them even more dangerous, even more vulnerable. "We need to get this to the right people," she said. "To someone we can trust." Matteo nodded. "I know someone," he said. "Someone who can help us. Someone who is not afraid to fight for the truth." He paused, his gaze meeting hers. "But it will be dangerous, Bianca," he said. "More dangerous than anything we've faced before. Are you ready for this?" Bianca looked at him, her eyes unwavering. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready." She was ready to face the darkness, to fight for justice, to reclaim her life, her future. She was ready to stand by Matteo's side, to trust him, to love him, no matter the cost. The scars of the soul might never fully heal, but they would not define her. They would make her stronger, more resilient, more determined. She was a Vitali, and she would not be defeated. Chapter 17. Into the Lion's Denver. The someone Matteo knew turned out to be a renowned investigative journalist, a woman named Isabella Rossi, no relation to the Rossi famiglia, known for her fearless reporting, her unwavering commitment to truth, and her ability to take down even the most powerful figures. She was a legend in her field, a force to be reckoned with. Matteo arranged a meeting, a clandestine rendezvous in a remote location, a small, abandoned farmhouse outside the city. They arrived under the cover of darkness, their senses on high alert, constantly watching for any sign of danger. Isabella Rossi was waiting for them, her face grim, her eyes sharp and intelligent. She was a woman in her late 50s, her hair streaked with silver, her demeanor both commanding and compassionate. "Matteo," she said, her voice firm but welcoming. "It's been a long time." "Isabella," Matteo replied, his voice respectful. "Thank you for meeting us." He introduced Bianca, explaining her situation, her connection to the Vitali famiglia, her quest for justice. Isabella listened intently, her gaze fixed on Bianca, assessing her, judging her. "You're a brave woman, Bianca Vitali," she said. "Walking into a lion's den, challenging powers far greater than your own." "I have no choice," Bianca replied. "I need to expose the truth. I need to get justice for my mother, for everyone who has been hurt by this conspiracy." Matteo handed Isabella the encrypted data chip, explaining its contents, the evidence it contained, the proof of Project Nightingale's existence, of the government's crimes. Isabella examined the chip, her brow furrowed. "This is explosive," she said. "If this is true, it could bring down a lot of people. It could shake the foundations of our society." "It is true," Matteo said. "I know it is. I was a part of it." Isabella looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and pity. "You were an agent," she said. "A part of this darkness. Why are you doing this? Why are you turning against them?" Matteo hesitated, his gaze shifting to Bianca. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said. "And because I love her." His words hung in the air, a declaration of love, a confession of loyalty, a testament to his transformation. Isabella nodded, her expression softening. "Love can be a powerful motivator," she said. "It can make us do things we never thought possible." She turned back to Bianca. "I believe you," she said. "And I will help you. I will publish this story. I will expose Project Nightingale. I will bring these criminals to justice." Bianca felt a surge of hope, of relief. Finally, someone believed them, someone was willing to fight alongside them, someone who had the power to make a difference. "But it won't be easy," Isabella warned. "They will come after us. They will try to silence us, to discredit us, to destroy us. We need to be prepared. We are, Bianca said, her voice firm. We're ready for anything. We have to be smart, strategic. They will use all their resources to discredit this,
to bury it,
Isabella added, her tone serious. Matteo nodded. We have a plan. They spent the next few hours discussing their strategy, planning their next move, preparing for the inevitable backlash. They knew they were walking into a war zone, that they were facing enemies with immense power and influence. But they were determined to fight, to win, to expose the truth. As they prepared to leave, Isabella looked at Bianca, her eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and concern. You're a remarkable woman, Bianca Vitali, she said. You have the strength of your convictions, the courage of your heart. But you also have vulnerability. Be careful. Don't let them break you. Bianca nodded, her heart filled with a newfound resolve. She would not be broken. She would not be silenced. She would fight for justice, for truth, for love. She would walk into the lion's den, and she would emerge victorious. They left the farmhouse, disappearing into the night, their destination unknown, their future uncertain. But they were together, and that, they knew, was all that mattered. They were armed with the truth, fueled by love, and driven by a relentless pursuit of justice. The lion's den awaited, and they were ready to face it head-on, with courage, with determination, with the unwavering belief that even in the darkest of times, hope could still prevail, and truth could still conquer all. Chapter 18. The Ties That Bind. The publication of Isabella Rossi's expose on Project Nightingale sent shockwaves through the country. The story, detailing the government's illegal surveillance program, the corruption, the abuse of power, and the connection to Bianca's mother's murder, dominated the headlines, sparking public outrage, calls for investigations, and demands for accountability. The reaction was swift and brutal. The government, caught off guard, initially denied the allegations, dismissing the story as fake news, a conspiracy theory, a smear campaign orchestrated by their enemies. But as more evidence emerged, as more whistleblowers came forward, as the public pressure mounted, their denials became increasingly untenable. The powerful people behind Project Nightingale, the shadowy figures who had pulled the strings from behind the scenes, began to scramble, to cover their tracks, to silence their critics, to protect their interests. They launched a counteroffensive, using their influence, their resources, their connections to discredit Isabella, to smear Bianca and Matteo, to paint them as criminals, as traitors, as enemies of the state. Bianca and Matteo found themselves under constant attack, their lives threatened, their reputations tarnished, their every move scrutinized. They were forced to go underground, to live in hiding, to rely on a network of trusted allies, of former colleagues of Matteo's, of friends of Isabella's, who believed in their cause, who were willing to risk their lives to help them. They were constantly on the move, changing locations, using encrypted communication, avoiding detection. They knew they were being hunted, that their enemies were closing in, that their time was running out. Despite the danger, despite the pressure, despite the constant threat of discovery, Bianca and Matteo remained resolute, determined to see this through, to expose the truth, to get justice. Their bond, forged in the crucible of betrayal and loss, strengthened with each passing day, their love for each other deepening, their commitment to each other unwavering. One evening, while hiding in a small, remote cabin in the mountains, Bianca and Matteo received a message, an encrypted communication from an unknown source. The truth is deeper than you know. Project Nightingale is just the tip of the iceberg. Look for the Falcon. The Falcon? What was that? Another code name? Another conspiracy? Another layer of deception? It never ends, does it? Bianca said, her voice weary, her spirit flagging. Matteo looked at her, his eyes filled with concern. We can't give up, Bianca, he said. We've come too far. We're too close to the truth. But what if it's too big? She asked. What if we can't win? What if we're fighting a battle we can't possibly win? He reached out and gently touched her face, his fingers tracing the lines of her cheek. We'll fight together, he said. We'll face whatever comes our way. Together. His words, his touch, his unwavering belief in her, in them, gave her strength, renewed her hope, rekindled her determination. She would not give up. She would not be defeated. She would fight alongside Matteo until the very end.
Bianca nodded.
They had to keep going. The Falcon, she repeated. We need to find out what it means. They began to investigate, searching for any reference to the Falcon in their existing files, in Isabella's archives, in their online databases. They found nothing. It was as if the term had been deliberately erased, wiped clean from the record, even more thoroughly than Project Nightingale. They decided to contact Isabella, to ask for her help, her guidance. They met with her in a secret location, a hidden room beneath a bustling cafe in the city. The Falcon, Isabella said, her brow furrowed. I've heard whispers of it, rumors, but nothing concrete. It's something even bigger than Project Nightingale. Something that reaches the highest levels of power, not just in this country, but globally. Bianca's heart sank. A global conspiracy? It seemed impossible, unimaginable. What do we do? She asked, her voice filled with despair. Isabella looked at her, her eyes filled with a mixture of determination and fear. We keep digging, she said. We keep searching. We keep fighting. We don't give up. We expose the truth, no matter how deep it goes, no matter how dangerous it is. Her words were a rallying cry, a call to arms. Bianca and Matteo exchanged a look, their eyes locking, their resolve hardening. They would not be intimidated. They would not be silenced. They would fight for justice, for truth, for a better world. The ties that bound them, the ties of love, of loyalty, of shared purpose, were stronger than ever. They were a force to be reckoned with, a team, a partnership, a love story forged in the fires of adversity. And they would not be defeated. They would continue their quest, their journey into the heart of darkness, until the truth was revealed, until justice was served, until the world was free from the grip of corruption and deceit. The Falcon awaited, and they were ready to hunt it down. Chapter 19. Redemption's Embrace. The search for the Falcon led Bianca and Matteo on a perilous journey across continents, following a trail of cryptic clues, hidden messages, and long-forgotten secrets. They uncovered a vast, intricate network of power and influence, a global conspiracy involving governments, corporations, and shadowy organizations, all working together to control the world's resources, manipulate its economies, and suppress any dissent. They discovered that Project Nightingale was just one small part of this larger scheme, a tool used to silence those who threatened to expose the truth, to maintain the status quo, to keep the powerful in power. Their investigation took them to remote locations, to hidden archives, to forgotten cities, where they met with former intelligence operatives, disgruntled politicians, and courageous whistleblowers, all of whom risked their lives to share information, to help them piece together the puzzle. They learned that the Falcon was the code name for a secret organization, a cabal of ultra-wealthy individuals, powerful politicians, and influential figures from around the world, who had been manipulating global events for decades, orchestrating wars, engineering financial crises, and controlling governments from behind the scenes. Their goal was to create a new world order, a global system of control where they would be the ultimate rulers, where democracy would be a sham, and where freedom would be an illusion. Bianca and Matteo were horrified by the scale of the conspiracy, by the sheer audacity of their enemies, by the implications for the future of humanity. They realized that they were facing a force far greater than they had ever imagined, a power that seemed almost insurmountable. But they refused to give up. They were driven by a burning desire for justice, by a deep-seated belief in the power of truth, by their unwavering love for each other. They worked tirelessly, gathering evidence, connecting the dots, building a case that could expose the Falcon and bring its members to justice. They knew they were playing a dangerous game, that they were risking their lives with every step they took. But they were determined to see it through, to fight for a better world, for a future free from tyranny and oppression. Their efforts did not go unnoticed. The Falcon, aware of their investigation, launched a counteroffensive, using its vast resources to discredit them, to harass them, to threaten them, to try to stop them. Bianca and Matteo found themselves under constant surveillance, their communications monitored, their movements tracked. They were forced to go even deeper underground, to rely on their wits, their skills, their network of trusted allies to survive. They faced numerous threats, close calls, near-death experiences. They were betrayed by those they trusted, abandoned by those they relied upon, hunted by those they sought to expose. But they persevered. Their love for each other, their commitment to justice, their unwavering belief in the power of truth gave them the strength to keep going, to overcome every obstacle, to face every danger. One evening, while hiding in a small, secluded village in the Swiss Alps, they received a message, an encrypted communication from an unexpected source. The time has come. Meet me at the Citadel.
Dawn. The shepherd.
The Citadel?
The shepherd? Who were they?
And what did they want? This could be it, Bianca, Matteo said, his voice filled with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. This could be our chance to finally expose the Falcon. Or it could be a trap, Bianca said, her voice cautious. We have to take the risk, Matteo said. We have no choice. They prepared for the meeting, their hearts pounding with anticipation and fear. They knew they were walking into the lion's den, that they were facing their ultimate test. But they were ready. They were armed with the truth, fueled by love, and driven by a relentless pursuit of justice. Redemption's embrace was within reach, but it would come at a price. They were prepared to pay it. For each other. For the world. For the future. The Citadel awaited. And they would face it, together, as they had faced every challenge, every obstacle, every danger, with courage, with determination, with the unwavering belief that even in the darkest of times, hope could still prevail and truth could still conquer all. The long journey, the betrayals, the losses, it had all led to this. Chapter 20. A legacy forged in fire. The Citadel was an ancient fortress, perched high on a mountaintop, its stone walls blending seamlessly with the rugged landscape. It was a symbol of power, of secrecy, of invincibility. It was the perfect meeting place for the Falcon, a place where they felt safe, untouchable above the law. Bianca and Matteo arrived just before dawn, the sky still dark, the air crisp and cold. They approached the fortress cautiously, their senses on high alert, constantly scanning for any sign of danger. They found a hidden entrance, a narrow passage concealed behind a crumbling wall, a secret way into the heart of the Citadel. They slipped inside, their footsteps echoing in the silent corridors, their hearts pounding in their chests. They navigated the labyrinthine passages, following a series of cryptic clues, of hidden symbols that had been left for them by the shepherd. They knew they were being watched, that their every move was being monitored, that they were walking into a trap. Finally, they reached their destination, a large, circular chamber at the center of the fortress. The room was dimly lit, the only source of light coming from a series of torches flickering on the walls. Standing in the center of the chamber, surrounded by a group of armed guards, was a figure they recognized instantly. It was the former intelligence officer, Bianca's betrayer, Matteo's former handler, the man who had been pulling the strings from the beginning. "Welcome, Bianca, Matteo," he said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "I've been expecting you." Bianca and Matteo exchanged a look, their eyes filled with a mixture of anger and determination. They were not surprised. They had known deep down that he was involved, that he was a part of the Falcon. "You," Matteo said, his voice a low growl. "You were behind it all along." The officer smiled, a cold, cruel smile.
Of course, he said.
"I am the shepherd. I am the one who guides the flock, who protects the order, who ensures the survival of our way of life." "Your way of life?"
Bianca scoffed.
"A way of life built on lies, on corruption, on murder?" "A necessary evil," the officer said. "To maintain control, to prevent chaos, to ensure stability." "Stability for whom?"
Bianca demanded.
"For you? For the Falcon? For the elite few, who benefit from the system?" The officer ignored her, his gaze shifting to Matteo. "You were one of us, Matteo," he said.
You were one of the best.
You could have had it all. Power, wealth, influence. Why did you betray us?
Because I found something more important, Mateo said.
Something you'll never understand.
Love.
Loyalty. Justice. The officer laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. Sentimental nonsense, he said. Love is a weakness. Loyalty is a tool. Justice is an illusion. He nodded to his guards, and they moved forward, their weapons trained on Bianca and Mateo.
It's over, he said.
You failed. The Falcon will endure. The New World Order will prevail. Bianca and Mateo stood their ground, their hands clasped together, their eyes locked. They were ready. They would fight. They would die if necessary for what they believed in. But then, something unexpected happened. The chamber doors burst open, and a group of armed figures stormed inside, their weapons blazing. It was Isabella Rossi, leading a team of journalists, activists, and former colleagues of Mateo's, agents who had grown disillusioned with the agency, with the Falcon, with the corruption. Chaos erupted. Gunfire filled the chamber, the sounds of fighting, of shouting, of dying, echoing through the fortress. Bianca and Mateo joined the fray, fighting alongside their allies, battling the guards, struggling to survive. The officer, caught off guard, tried to escape, but Mateo intercepted him, tackling him to the ground, engaging him in a brutal hand-to-hand fight. Bianca, meanwhile, found herself face-to-face with several guards, their weapons trained on her. She fought with a ferocity she never knew she possessed, using the skills Mateo had taught her, drawing on her inner strength, her Vitali blood. The battle raged, a fierce, desperate struggle between those who sought to expose the truth and those who sought to suppress it, between those who fought for justice and those who clung to power. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the fighting subsided. The guards were defeated, their bodies scattered across the chamber floor. The officer lay unconscious at Mateo's feet, his reign of terror over. Isabella Rossi approached Bianca and Mateo, her face grim but triumphant.
We did it, she said.
We exposed them. The Falcon is finished. Bianca and Mateo looked at each other, their hearts filled with a mixture of relief, of exhaustion, of victory. They had done it. They had overcome seemingly insurmountable odds, had faced their demons, had fought for justice, and had won. But the victory was bittersweet. Many lives had been lost, many sacrifices had been made. The scars of the battle, both physical and emotional, would remain forever. The world would never be the same. The exposure of the Falcon, the revelation of their crimes, the dismantling of their network, would send shockwaves across the globe, triggering investigations, prosecutions, and reforms. Bianca and Mateo, hailed as heroes, would become symbols of hope, of courage, of the power of truth. Their love story, forged in the fires of adversity, would inspire generations to come. They left the citadel as the sun was rising. Bianca looked at Mateo. The fire in his eyes still burned, but now it was tempered with peace.
What now?
She asked, her voice filled with a quiet hope. He smiled, a genuine smile, full of love and tenderness. Now, he said, we build a new legacy. A legacy forged in fire, tempered by love, and dedicated to truth. A legacy worthy of the sacrifices that had been made. A legacy that would honor the past while embracing the future. A legacy of justice, of peace, of hope. A legacy forged in fire. Indeed. Epilogue. The years that followed were a time of healing, of rebuilding, of transformation. Bianca and Mateo, together, worked to dismantle the remnants of the Vitali Empire, transforming its illicit businesses into legitimate enterprises, using its resources to support charitable causes, to help those who had been harmed by the Famiglia's past actions. Bianca, no longer the reluctant heiress, embraced her role as a leader, as a force for good, as a champion of justice. She used her intelligence, her strength, her compassion to make a difference in the world, to create a better future for her community, for her family, for her loved ones. Mateo, freed from the shadows of his past, found redemption in his love for Bianca, in his commitment to justice, in his unwavering loyalty to her. He became her partner, her confidant, her protector, her rock. He used his skills, his experience, his knowledge to support her, to guide her, to help her achieve her goals. They married in a quiet, private ceremony, surrounded by their closest friends, by those who had stood by them through the darkest of times. It was a celebration of love, of resilience, of hope, a testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome adversity, to find light in the darkness. They built a new life for themselves, a life filled with love, with laughter, with purpose. They adopted children, giving them the loving, stable home they had both craved. They traveled the world, exploring new cultures, learning new languages, expanding their horizons. Bianca never forgot her mother, her father, Alessandro, or any of the others who had lost their lives in the struggle for justice. She honored their memory by living a life of purpose, by fighting for what she believed in, by making the world a better place. She often visited the small village in Tuscany where she had spent 10 years in hiding, the place where she had found peace, where she had rediscovered herself. She would sit in the quiet garden, surrounded by the beauty of nature, and reflect on her journey, on the challenges she had overcome, on the love she had found. Matteo was always by her side, his hand in hers, his eyes filled with love and admiration. He was her constant companion, her soulmate, her partner in life. He had found his redemption, his peace, his happiness in her arms. One evening, as they sat together on the terrace of their villa, overlooking the rolling hills of Tuscany, the sun setting in a blaze of glory, Bianca turned to Matteo, her eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft, "for everything, for saving me, for loving me, for believing in me." He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Thank you," he said, "for giving me a second chance, for showing me that even in the darkest of hearts, love can still bloom." They kissed, a long, slow, passionate kiss, a testament to their enduring love, to their unbreakable bond, to their shared journey. They had faced the devil, had struck a bargain, and had emerged victorious, stronger, wiser, and more in love than ever before. Their legacy was not one of power, of wealth, of fear. It was a legacy of love, of justice, of hope, a legacy forged in fire, tempered by compassion, and dedicated to the pursuit of a better world. A legacy that would endure, inspiring generations to come, a testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome adversity, to find light in the darkness, to create a future filled with peace, with justice, with love. The sun set, casting a warm golden glow over them, a silent blessing on their life, their love, their legacy. It was a perfect ending to a long and arduous journey, a promise of a bright and beautiful future.